Hey everyone, it's Maya and welcome to my series on emergency funds. In this video, which is part 1 of this series, we'll cover what an emergency fund is, why it's an absolute must-have, and the burning question, how much you should save. Let's dive in. So what is an emergency fund? Life is full of surprises, and let's face it, not all of them are good. We've all experienced those unexpected moments that catch us off guard, from sudden medical bills to our car breaking down at the worst possible time. It's during these moments that having an emergency fund can truly be a lifesaver. Without an emergency fund, your options become limited. You might have to rely on credit cards or other high-interest debt, and this can quickly spiral out of control, leaving you in a difficult financial situation. An emergency fund is exactly what it sounds like. A financial safety net designed to catch you when life throws a curveball your way. So, if you don't have an emergency fund, what you do have is an emergency. The level of risk you're exposing yourself to is extremely high. It's like walking on a tightrope without a safety net. One unexpected expense and everything can come crashing down. And that's why it's so important to give yourself a financial cushion to fall back on. So what exactly is an emergency expense? Before I answer that question, let me share a personal story. A couple of years ago, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and around that time, I had to undergo an emergency procedure that wasn't covered by my insurance. This was a really difficult time for me, and reflecting on it now, I'm so grateful that I had saved an emergency fund, because without it, it would have made an already stressful situation even worse. Now, coming back to the question, what is an emergency expense? There are 3 questions I like to ask myself. Is it unexpected? Is it unavoidable? Is it urgent? If the answer to all of these questions is yes, then it qualifies as an emergency expense. It's a surprise bill demanding your immediate attention and financial resources. Let's say you lost your job and have no other source of income, or you need treatment for an injury that's not covered by your insurance. These are surprise events resulting in unexpected, unavoidable, and urgent expenses and are genuine reasons to dip into your emergency fund. Another example could be waking up one morning to find your toilet overflowing. Absolute nightmare. You didn't see it coming, you definitely can't delay fixing it. This is also for sure an emergency expense. However, before tapping into your emergency fund, it's a good idea to see whether you can adjust your budget for the month to cover the expense. Just because it fits the definition of an emergency expense doesn't necessarily mean you should immediately use your emergency fund. Once you tap into your emergency fund, you'll have to replenish it. If you can make some adjustments to your budget to cover the expense, it might be the better option. One common pitfall I find people fall into, and if I'm being honest, I've done this myself, is dipping into their emergency fund to cover irregular expenses, which are similar in that they can certainly catch us off guard, but they're distinctly different. Unlike emergency expenses, irregular expenses can be planned for, and they're usually optional, or they can be delayed. A trip to the nail salon because you and the girls decided to have a night out, and your nails are an absolute disaster, I hate to say it, is not an emergency expense. I know it can feel like an SOS moment, and as much as I do love cute nails, in the end, it's optional, and that's why it's not an emergency expense. To be clear, I'm not saying to stop going to the salon. What I am saying is to make sure this and other irregular expenses like travel, personal development, birthday and holiday gifts, or whatever else these look like for you, are accommodated for in your budget. Dipping into your emergency fund to cover these irregular expenses may seem like a quick fix, but trust me, it's a slippery slope. Until you incorporate these irregular expenses into your budget, you will forever be tempted to treat whatever you've built up in your emergency fund as the go-to fixer-upper. Once you've crossed that line once, you'll be tempted to do it over and over again. It's a guaranteed way of self-sabotaging your efforts of building up an emergency fund. Remember, the purpose of an emergency fund is to provide a safety net for surprise events that result in unavoidable and urgent expenses. So it's important to preserve it for genuine emergencies. When genuine emergencies arise, your future self will thank you for it. Honestly, I believe it's one of the best ways you can show up for yourself. So how much should we be putting away into our emergency fund? Financial experts have different opinions on this matter, but a common recommendation is to save 3 to 6 months worth of essential expenses, including things like rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, and minimum debt payments. So let's say you spend $2,000 on your basic needs every month. For a 3-month emergency fund, you'd aim to save $6,000. And for a 6-month emergency fund, you target $12,000. But remember, this is just a guide. Everyone's situation is different, and so you may need to save more depending on your circumstances. For instance, if you have dependents or a less predictable income, it'd be wise to have a larger emergency fund. Your health and the extent of your insurance coverage are also additional factors to consider. If you've experienced health challenges in the past, or if your insurance coverage doesn't fully address your needs, it may be a good idea to save a little extra to cover for potential medical expenses and safeguard your well-being. Personally, I have 9 months worth of expenses saved up, but I know people with up to 12 to 18 months tucked away. When it comes to what makes sense for you, remember that it's not always about the numbers. Sometimes it's about what gives you mental peace. Since there's no one-size-fits-all solution, I'd say the right size emergency fund is the one that allows you to sleep better at night. Also, an important point to keep in mind is that as your life evolves, the target size for your emergency fund will likely need to change too. For example, if you relocate to a more expensive city, or if you upgrade to a bigger apartment, you may need to adjust your emergency fund target to accommodate for these increased costs. It's important to regularly review and update your emergency fund goal and make sure it stays aligned with your current circumstances. Now, forewarning, when you first calculate your emergency fund target number, it can be a jarring experience and feel like you're faced with this impossible task. But remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, and your emergency fund won't be either. That said, while the key is to start small and stay consistent, there are tried and tested ways to speed up the process, which I'm excited to share with you in a future episode of this series. For now, that wraps up part 1 of my series on emergency funds. We covered what an emergency fund is, what it should be used for, and how much you should aim to save. In the next video in this series, we dive into the steps for building your emergency fund, so be sure to watch that. If you're finding this series helpful and informative, it would mean a lot to me if you could show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. Your engagement helps to spread the word and allows me to reach even more people that can benefit from information like this. And hey, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss out on any upcoming parts of this series and any other insightful content on personal finance. Thank you and see you in the next video. Bye for now.